Welcome back to Folk Tales of the African Savannah, where age-old tales come to reality and new ones are brewed. Sit, relax, and enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe.
In a bustling town, where the streets smelled of fresh bread and merchants called out their wares, there lived a man named Abasi. He owned the grandest shop in the market square, filled with bolts of the finest silk, spices from distant lands, and golden trinkets that shimmered under the sun. But despite his wealth, Abasi was neither generous nor kind. He underpaid his workers, cheated desperate customers, and laughed at the misfortune of others. One chilly evening, an old woman shuffled into his shop, carrying a small bag of grain wrapped in a tattered cloth. "Kind sir," she said in a frail voice, "I have nothing to eat. May I trade this grain for a piece of bread?" Abasi curled his lip and examined the grain. It was small, uneven, and nothing like the fine grains he sold in sacks for hefty sums. "This grain is worthless," he scoffed, "but I'll take it, just because I can." He snatched the bag from her hands and tossed it behind the counter. The old woman did not protest. She looked at Abasi with weary, knowing eyes and whispered, "What you take unfairly will take from you in return." Then she turned and disappeared into the crowded street. Abasi dismissed her words with a laugh. What could an old woman possibly know about wealth? He returned to counting his golden coins, stacking them high, rubbing them between his fingers, feeling the weight of his riches. That night, as the town quieted and the oil lamps flickered, Abasi lay in his grand chamber surrounded by sacks of gold. He smiled, listening to the satisfying clink of his coins as he rearranged them. But suddenly, a strange rustling noise filled the room. He sat up, his heart pounding. The sacks of gold trembled as if something inside was moving. The ground seemed to shift beneath him. The piles of coins, his precious fortune, melted before his very eyes. Golden grains spilled from the sacks, flowing like sand, cascading across the floor. They surged toward him, pouring over his feet, his legs, his hands reaching desperately to gather the coins that were no longer coins. The grains slipped through his fingers, multiplying, flooding the room. Abasi tried to escape, but the grain swallowed his treasures, sweeping over his lavish carpets, creeping up his walls. His wealth, the riches he had so greedily hoarded, was vanishing into worthless grain. Panic twisted his breath. He clutched his head, watching helplessly as his fortune turned to dust. Morning came, and his shop stood eerily silent. The townspeople whispered of his misfortune. His workers found only a pile of grain where once stood a great store of gold. They abandoned the merchant and his crumbling shop. Customers refused to trade with him, turning their backs on the man who had once looked down on them. Abasi wandered the streets, his fine robes now tattered, begging for food in the very market where he had once stood tall. No one listened, no one helped, and somewhere in the farthest corner of the town, an old woman smiled, knowing that justice had been served. Morale: cruelty and greed may bring temporary wealth, but in the end they lead only to ruin.